Hey there, I'm back again. Adam Von Romer, author, speaker, seminar leader, 37-year veteran of the commercial, and 37 years. Never thought I'd ever say anything like that. But 37-year veteran of the commercial investment real estate world. And in this segment, we're going to talk about managing the process. So what do you do when you get the deal under contract? And listen, I'm not one of those guys who's afraid to use the dirty word deal, because that's what we call them. And I think you'll find out that I'm the ultimate reductionist. I don't like jargon. I like to speak in terms that people can understand. And it's not hard for me to do that. Anyhow, flying right along here, let's talk a little bit about actually managing the process. Now, I've got to tell you, again, if I tell you something here, fly it, run it past your broker or your counsel before you do it. I recommend, and this might make your hair on the back of your neck stand up, you go to one closing and never go to another closing again. And where I'm going with that is, at the point of contract, generally speaking, you as a commercial broker have fulfilled the object of your employment. And I'll talk more about, the contract process and the closing process later on. But the only good thing that can come from going to a closing is the broker gets a haircut at the hands of the buyer or the seller. And I'm going to tell you a real quick story, and this used to happen to me all the time. I'd go to a closing, the attorneys would be sitting at the opposite end of the table with looks of consternation on their face, and almost in unison they'd turn and look at me and go, well, if we could all be reasonable, we could get this transaction closed today. Which is code for, if the broker will donate some of their fee, we'll go ahead and close now. And in one case, I looked at both the attorneys and I said, I understand just how potentially embarrassing this is. So if you'll go ahead and write our commission check now, we'll go ahead and leave and you guys can work this out in confidence, if you will. Which, they looked like they were both gopping fish out of water kind of thing. But here's the deal. Depending on where you're working, you've got to place that contract with somebody. And you can't just chuck it in a desk drawer, because there's going to be a lot of things that need to be taken care of in that process. And if you don't watch it, it's not going to happen. I've had cases where the agent on the other side of the transaction went on a 4-month vacation to Europe. Good luck getting that processed. I actually had to step in and take over as both the buyer agent and the seller agent and walk literally handhold the buyer through the transaction. And I was not pleased, but I had to do it. Otherwise, guess who wasn't getting paid? So again, how do you handle that? You've got to take over those details. And I'll talk in a minute about something that I use all the time. The other thing I mentioned to you earlier is using a title company versus an attorney. And again, I don't know what your rules and regulations are in your marketplace, and I don't know what your broker's opinion is of this. But in my market, I use attorneys for one thing and title companies for another. If I have a particularly difficult or if I have a particularly nuanced transaction, I will typically take that to an attorney. I've done hundreds of transactions with attorneys. I've had good attorneys, I've had bad attorneys, but over the years I've identified the ones that I know that are deal solution guys, not deal killers. In fact, a few years ago, I walked into the office one day and my partner is an attorney in another business. And I said to him, that's it, I'm getting admitted to the bar. And he goes, why? I said, I can now save time and money and kill my own deals. And he's like, you're an idiot. That's the guys you want to avoid. You want to look for people who actually help you put deals together. And they're few and far between, but they're worth their weight in gold if you can find them. Now, title companies, if it's something simple, like a single tenant transaction, or, maybe a small retail center with about 3 leases, something like that, I'm going to take to a title company. And I like to keep a title company and an attorney in my pocket so that when I get into a little bit of a jam, I can reach out to one or the other and have them handle the transaction for me. The other thing is, depending on what market you're in, title companies often offer services over and above those which an attorney can afford and will do. Like, for example, I know that in my area, First American Title Solutions was invaluable in my early career in getting me research. So you want to look at the symbiosis between the title company and yourself, or the symbiosis between an attorney and yourself. And sometimes I even get, for example, BOVs and things referred to me from attorneys, and I do a lot of expert testimony and expert witness work. In fact, I took over a shopping center recently as a court-appointed receiver for a 37,000 square foot shopping center because of my relationship. So again, use your time and certainly your business to affect the highest possible return you can, and make sure you're looking for the people that have a reputation for getting the deals done. The big one here, and this is what I'm going to spend most of my time on, is the chronology letter. This is a lifesaver. What I do is I take the contract and I literally lift the dates for performance out of the contract. I put it in a letter that I send to the buyer, the buyer's attorney, the seller, the seller's attorney, the buyer's agent, the seller's agent, the title company, the mortgage broker, whoever's involved in the transaction. And I put those dates on my Outlook calendar. Now that I use RealNext, I actually put them in the virtual deal room and have them flagged on my calendar there. But what the letter says is basically, I'm sending you this letter to basically put you on notice that these are the dates for performance. These are the parties who are to perform them. And I am not going to, push the issue or get objectionable about it. But what I am going to do is follow up to make sure everything's being done in a timely fashion and in accordance with our original agreement. And I've got to tell you something. You'll encounter people who, they'll come back and they'll say, I need another 2 weeks for due diligence because I didn't get my environmental. Well, why didn't you get your environmental? I only ordered it yesterday. Well, hold on a second. You're 29 days into due diligence. You were supposed to have that handled earlier. What a lot of buyers try to do is they try to bundle all that stuff and use it as a negotiating issue, or they decide they're not going to pay the money to do their due diligence until they get their mortgage commitment. Both of those are big no-nos, especially if you're in a hyperactive market. So you want to make sure everybody's performing in accordance with the contract and getting things done. And my contract reflects that. My contract that I put together with my attorney basically says you have 3 days from the effective date to apply for a mortgage. You will provide us written proof of that. Now here's where it gets interesting, because in my contract it says if you haven't applied for the mortgage or you haven't received a commitment letter within 15 days and terminated the agreement, that whole exculpatory clause is deemed to be null and void. So what I'm doing is I'm boxing the buyer in. Now again, don't do this stuff without talking to your attorney or your broker, but know that this is how you get paid and keep the deal on track. Next up, time is of the essence. And what does that really mean? See, time is of the essence means that it is a date certain proposition. Down where I live in Florida, time is of the essence means somewhere on or about, not what it says in the contract. I know when I worked up in Pennsylvania, if it said the closing was at 4 o'clock Friday afternoon, everybody was sitting at the table at 3:55. And if you weren't there by 4:15, the lawsuits started flying. Down here, it depends. So guys, pay close attention to the time is of the essence and see how it's interpreted, or let's say enforced, in your market area. And time is of the essence means that that particular clause or action has to be taken or fulfilled by that time. And then last but not least, our buddy due diligence. What does it mean and who's going to handle it? Now, a lot of times what I do is when I'm taking the listing, I gather all of the due diligence materials together right there and then. So when the buyer signs the contract, I literally hand them the due diligence material with a receipt for the due diligence material, which I get them to sign. I also set up that virtual deal room, and I used to use Google Groups, where I'd put the documents right in the group and then invite the buyer and the buyer's attorney and the seller and the seller's attorney and everybody to that group and have that central repository for those documents. That way there's no excuse that we didn't get the due diligence. Here's the receipt for it. Here's the day it was delivered. The clock starts ticking now. But if you start to master these things and start to really pull your transactions together, this is how you can ratchet up your percentages as far as the closing goes. And recently in Florida, a few years ago, it got so bad that a guy named Jeb Bush, whose brother was famously a president, led a charge to enact something called the Florida Commercial Lien Law. And basically, we now have a lien law in Florida that says, if you close or sign a lease and you don't pay me, the title company is instructed by law to withhold the commission until we settle. And then you and I, as the buyer and seller, the seller and the seller's agent, have to negotiate that out. Back in the good old days, they'd stand up, shake your hand, tell you how much they loved you, and then you had to sue them to get paid. That's how bad it got down here. I certainly hope that's not happening in your market area, but it's like I joke, trust in Allah, but tie your camels. Make sure you get all the I's dotted, make sure you get all the T's crossed, make sure you have everybody on notice as to what's going on in this transaction, when it's due to close, and who's handling the activity. And then stay on it. That's the only way you're going to be able to ensure you get paid in this business. Again, thank you for joining me. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please feel free to reach out, and I'll see you in our next video.